the time, training, nor the inclination for strategic thought.
Let's play replay.
Knowledge.
Daddies.
Hello.
Hello.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. Just had a very long nap.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's nice.
Yeah.
How long? How long?
Like 80 minutes.
Oh, 80. Let me see. A nap that was like 180 minutes the other day.
During what time of the day?
It was like 11 to 1 or something, or like 10 to 1.
That's a long nap for that early in the day.
Yeah, it sort of, threw a wrench in things.
Hey, Jordan.
Hey,
Hey
Jordan.
there, what's happening?
Oh, we're just talking naps.
Oh man, all
Yeah.
about the nap.
Have you taken any long naps recently?
I mean, yeah, this past year and a half, I took more long naps than I think I ever took.
Holy shit. Well, speaking of long naps, we want to talk about death and mourning. And
Can you hear me okay? I've got a.
yeah, I can hear you great.
Is
You
that
sound
better? I can't really.
You sound
hear.
great to me. I mean, I'm on a stupid phone because
Yeah, that's
I'm-
better. Is that better? I think that's better.
yeah, you sound good. You sound like Barbara Streisand after a bad cold.
All right. So I was my put the settings on right then.
No, you sound fine. You sound fine. And I'm not even gonna ask how I sound because there's nothing I could do about it. I'm talking into a cell phone.
You actually don't sound bad though.
Oh, good. Anyway, so Jordan has a podcast called Where's the Grief, right?
Yes.
And he talks to a lot of very interesting people, funny people, other just interesting people also, about grief and the grieving process. And I was on an episode and it was actually really, really therapeutic talking about it. And yeah, and I wanted to bring him on to talk about the process of grieving, what he's learned about it, how to, I don't know about accelerate the process, because that sounds a little bit.
I don't think that's possible.
How do I go from step 1 to step 5 in
Yeah.
2 hours?
The sad part about grief is that there are no shortcuts. You can, I always say that like the goal is to try to remember what works, and even more importantly, remember what didn't work so you don't do it again.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes, a number of times before you realize, oh shit, I'm doing the same thing over and over again and it doesn't work.
Oh, well, we got to get back to that. I want to know what didn't work for sure. I guess I have my own things that didn't work, but I don't. You probably know better than I do. But yeah, I want to talk about what made you start that podcast and how'd you get into that?
Well, I had been doing comedy already when my only brother was killed in a car accident at the age of 21, and it was really surreal. I felt like, going on stage and presenting a version of myself to an audience that really did not represent what I was going through in those times. It was really hard. But I found a self-help support group that I started really connecting with myself at. Really found a place to be able to talk about stuff. And quite frankly, just talking with other comics off stage about shit they were going through, there was a real connection when you get vulnerable with people. And I think comics have a very, there's a kinship when you're doing shows together and you're sort of in the trenches together, you share a lot of stuff with each other. And I felt like the fact that I was able to be open about what I was going through with some of them allowed them to be open with me about stuff they were dealing with that they might not have talked to other people about. And I just, between the two things, between having a community to talk to and having a group to talk to that was specifically about that, my loss and my grief. It took time, but eventually I felt like the podcast format was really a perfect way to sort of meld those two worlds.
Yeah.
Feel like it's one of those topics that we don't talk about. And so that when we end up having to deal with it, we don't really know what we're doing. We don't know if we're doing it correctly because we have no blueprint for it. And nobody tells us how to deal with it except don't bother me with yours.
True. True. I mean, I have a few questions. Well, I mean, I sometimes do suffer grief resentment when I see people who I don't know going through grief on Facebook. I'm like, I don't know you. And then I'm feeling like your emotional baggage. I'm like, oh man, what? Am I an asshole for feeling that way?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think, there are things that you can see people posting online that might be a little bit of an overshare and think they're kind of an asshole regardless. I don't think it has to be about their grief. Go back in their timeline. I'm sure there's something else you can find about them to hate.
Yeah. For sure.
But I do think that it's, it goes back to that same thing that I was just saying. We don't talk about it. So there's nowhere, where do we go to talk about it? I think, the fact that we have the access to the internet, we could put these thoughts online and, some people like you might be turned off by it, but it might actually also bring somebody in and create an opportunity for that person to have a conversation with somebody about this that they might not have otherwise had. I think sometimes, people post that stuff. It's hard to tell whether or not people post it because they want attention or they want sympathy, or if they really want to start a conversation, or if they just want to feel like their feed isn't just filled with all of their successes. You got to post some of the the other side of it sometimes, just to represent, just so you feel like you're able to express what you're going through. I feel like we don't see anybody anymore. But we sort of catch up with people without their knowledge just by seeing what they're putting on their Facebook and their Instagram. Sure. So I don't know. I think there doesn't seem to be a protocol for it, but I do know that I'll say this. I'm very happy that I have a couple of Facebook groups that I'm in that I can vent into about some of the stuff that I deal with. That's, specific to what I deal with, where it's, when I'm having a bad day, I can post in there and people that are also going through something similar will post about it, and it doesn't show up on my timeline. Like I don't have to drag people into my unpacking of the baggage, emotional baggage,
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I know that not everybody has that. Not everybody has an outlet where they can really talk about it. And so I don't know. I try not to judge too harshly about that stuff because we're all in our own little grief bubble when we're going through stuff. And so I think, I just remember, I remember specifically posting stuff like that on my own feed and waking up the next morning and reading it and being like, oh shit, what's wrong with me? I shouldn't have posted that. I don't think I deleted any of it, but I felt shame for having posted it in a weird way.
Yeah. I mean, Facebook and Instagram are weird places just because the algorithm doesn't do the best job of showing things to the people who really would want to see it the most.
Yeah.
Besides,
yes, this picture commemorating your dead family member is your most liked photo of 2020.
It's got like the sunshine background.
Yeah.
That show.
Yeah, I was gonna say, aside from those Facebook groups that you were talking about, are there any places in particular that you find are when it comes to the internet and posting about grief that you find that are like good places and resources that you've found? And I also mentioned that if you see me flailing around, it's because I just saw that there's a bug in here, and I think if I see it and it's close by, I might go to kill it. Right, it's like right there. So that's what that is.
I'm listening to your answer and also possibly swatting at a.
I might be murdering this. I think it's a moth. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah,
maybe not appropriate during. Well,
I'll say this. I feel really lucky that I have this group. My organization is called the Compassionate Friends. They have chapters all over the country, and their Facebook presence is pretty big. It's focused mostly on the parents, but there is a pretty big sibling component to it as well. But it's basically it's for people that have lost a child, a grandchild, or a sibling. And there are a lot of resources online that they have. Depending on what kind of loss you're suffering, I know that there are other groups like this for, different specificities. I've talked to people a couple of guys that run a support group for widowers, specifically for men who have lost their spouses. Men have a different process than women, I feel like, in terms of dealing with their grief, especially since it's sort of ground into us from a very young age to not show our sadness, to not let them see you sweat, rub dirt in it and get back out there. So I think it's important to have some groups where men have those opportunities to talk with other people that are going through it. I got a bug in here too.
There you go.
But I do think, beyond finding the right, if you feel like you really need, to see a professional, finding the right therapist is always important, especially because I feel like a lot of therapists, they haven't been through the same, grief. It's hard to find a good grief therapist because they don't really know what they're doing either. Everybody's grief is different. What works for one person will not work for everybody. And so it's, I think it's hard to find that balance of finding a place where you really can feel safe and vulnerable without having a breakdown. Because I find that my group is one of those places where there's an unspoken understanding of what we're there for. And so sometimes we can joke with each other. It's not always so serious. There's a sort of a seamless transition from talking about the heavy stuff to talking about light stuff sometimes when you have a conversation with people like that. And it's refreshing, I feel like, to have that, to me, that's what sort of lends some normality to having that conversation, because otherwise everybody thinks it's just going to be sitting in a corner crying. Yeah, and certainly there is some of that, but it's not all that.
Yeah. I mean, to your point about men dealing with it differently than women, I mean, it's only very recently I'm like able to cry in front of people. Like until I mean, I cried in front of my girlfriend pretty recently, which is the first time, not at a funeral and not watching an Adam Sandler movie on an airplane. That
yeah. Right. I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's definitely one of those things that society just teaches you from a very young age, is that it's more appropriate for women to be able to be open with their emotions than it is for men. But I don't know if anybody's really comfortable crying in front of people. People are always a little bit ashamed. I feel like even in my group where we come together to specifically talk about the heavy stuff and where it's okay to cry there, people still apologize for crying in there.
Mm-hmm.
Men and women.
They're actors. And then they're trained to, bring out I don't know. I just know that I'm bad at acting, and I think I'm affected by the,
Are you bad at crying, Oscar? Do you cry? Can you cry?
Yeah.
They don't have the swell of the music on set. That's the problem.
Yeah, not as frequently as I should, I don't think.
Yeah. So, Jordan, if you don't mind me asking, how long ago did you lose your brother?
So this summer was 19 years.
Wow.
It's been 19 years. Yeah.
Wow.
He'd be 40 this year.
Oh my God. That's intense. So okay. So you were saying, what are some of the things that didn't work and maybe, I don't know, made you go backwards in the process? And what are some things that really,
I don't know if there is any going backwards in the process. I think that it's not a linear process in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that, there is, I feel like there's only forward and stagnation. So I don't think you can go, you can revisit things, but I don't think it's going backwards, because your perspective as time goes forward changes. And I know for me, I've gained a lot of perspective over time. And it took me a while before I was really seeking out a different perspective. But I think the main thing is, one of the main things anyway, is that those early years where it was really hard, I felt like I really lost a part of myself in the process. And so many of my friends were saying things like, your brother wouldn't want you feeling this way. And, everybody wants you to go back to normal. People want you, and certainly I wanted to sort of go back to normal. I wanted to try to find ways to reclaim and re-become the person that I had been before my brother died. But it took time before I realized that person no longer existed. Like that version of myself died with my brother. And this new version of myself that I was becoming, I was resistant to it for a long time. I wanted to go back to who I had been. And when I started to embrace who I was becoming, in the wake of it, that's when I started to see some real positive changes in my life, because then I started to, giving myself permission to be living the life that I was living, whether or not it was one I wanted or not, was really important, I think.
That makes sense. And do you think you changed because, well, do you think part of it was that, I don't know, I was talking with a friend the other day, how we're all like kind of slightly different people around different people. My friend was talking about being in a polyamorous relationship with two different women and feeling like he was two different people,
Okay.
almost schizophrenic. Do you think the person who you were around your brother died also, or do you think it was just dealing with the sadness of the loss, or both?
It's hard to say. I don't know if I really, it's not a thing that it's these are all just ideas, there's nothing tangible about any of this stuff. So it's hard to, I try to picture some of these things, some of these concepts, as like a Venn diagram or, amorphous amoebas, whatever, but I can't, it's hard for me to picture it. And I do think a lot visually, but I don't know. I think it's, I still find that, I'm able to access those parts of myself differently now because I have sort of embraced the direction that my life has gone, if that makes any sense.
No, that does make sense.
It's just like a mindset thing. I think the beginning is so hard because you don't know who you are. I felt like I didn't know who I was anymore. Who am I without, my brother and I grew up together, who's like the counterweight to my whole life. So it was like being untethered. I was so isolated, even within my family. Like everyone else in my family seemed to be handling it differently. My parents were pretty dealing with it pretty intensely, but my extended family didn't even really seem to be dealing with it at all. Didn't seem to phase any of them. And at 24, I was 24. I didn't have anybody in my life really that I had known that had lost a sibling. So it was hard for me to find place. Like I just felt like an alien, alone in my thoughts, and everywhere I looked, doors closed in my face, and didn't feel like I had an opportunity to really connect to myself in a lot of ways, to other people. So I think it wasn't until I started to get really comfortable with who I wanted to be and who I, how I wanted to move forward, that I started to be able to reconnect with parts of myself again.
That makes sense.
I think also, the intense loss is so hard because it reminds you how pointless life is in my, I looked at it that way. Like, what's the fucking point? I don't we're all going to die. We're a blip in history. Nothing matters. Whether or not I do well or whether or not I fail, it's all pointless. And it's a hard place to live in that headspace, to have that pointlessness. I think it took a long time before I really saw purpose in life again. And, when everything is pointless, it's almost like you disassociate from yourself, sort of almost intentionally, even if it's not conscious. That's what it felt like in some ways when I was really in a deep funk about stuff.
Yeah.
The pointlessness of things. So, it was hard to get back to a place where I was willing to admit that there was joy and happiness and hope possible. Once I was able to be open to the possibility of things not being so pointless, that is when I started to, find meaning again.
Is to help find meaning again, were there any things in particular that you would sort of do to engage that part of you?
Well, so the biggest perspective change that I think was positive is that it did help to sort of reorder a lot of my priorities, and it made it pretty crystal clear who the real people in my life were. You know, the people that were going to weather the storm with me. It was pretty easy to tell who those people were. So it was easy to cut people out that were no longer serving a purpose in my life, and focusing on the relationships that I wanted to keep and the people that I wanted to have in my circle. I think, you know, I don't know where I would have been. I don't know where I would have ended up without having people in my life that I could be the worst version of myself around, or like the saddest version of myself around, without them leaving.
Yeah, I definitely felt, I mean, I wasn't in mourning, but I was going through a pretty serious depression in my, I guess, early 20s, where everything also seemed meaningless. I dropped out of a Zen monastery.
Okay.
And I think through the wrong lens, Zen can seem like nihilism.
Right.
And I think it kind of did. And I was also going through withdrawal of being in a community that everyone is kind of working towards a goal that seemed meaningful.
Right.
And yeah, I did feel like most of my friends did kind of like fall by the wayside, except for those who were either also suffering through depression at the same time, or just, yeah, new friends who kind of didn't notice the difference. They were,
I mean, that's your friends list really changes when you go through this. You know, there's people that you've known your whole life that all of a sudden you can't relate to, and people that you just meet that only know this version of you, like you connect to really strongly. Mm-hmm. You know, I've found some of the best connections with people that I met after my brother died, the people that I was open to about stuff. I don't know, they never met me before that, so they only knew this version of me. Mm-hmm. You know, that's kind of a weird thing also.
Yeah, that makes sense. Oscar, have you ever gone through the grieving process?
I can't say I have, and I know it's such a unique process. I've close friends have gone through grieving processes, actually, that have been in similar situations to you, and just by seeing them, I know that, yeah, it's something completely unlike anything I've gone through myself. I think there are parallels to, you know, being in a low point in your life, you know, where, you know, any sort of existentially, you know, charged event happens. That's not the correct words, but anything that like sort of, you know, raises that question and sort of shakes you to your core. But I know that, you know, this situation in particular is very unique. Yeah. So I've only as an observer, I would say.
Yeah. I've had a grief poo-poo platter. You know, I got a little sampler. And like both of my grandmothers and my aunt and uncle all passed away within probably like 3 or 4 years. So that was pretty rough. But I've never lost, you know, I don't have any siblings. I've never lost a sibling. Though I kind of do more in the loss. I know my mother had a miscarriage and I would have had a brother, and I kind of still do more in that loss. You know, I feel like I would have been a better person had I had a brother.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, only child. Do you have any other siblings or?
No, it's just me now.
Yeah.
Which also brings a lot of its own level, you know, layers of things, you know. Now I'm what used to be 50% of attention from my parents now feels like 150% of attention. Is a lot.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not currently in a relationship, but when I was, the baby, you know, the grandbaby conversation was deafening.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I get that.
Yeah.
All the time.
I had a joke about my mom wanted a baby so bad. I was like, she was telling me, "Oh, don't worry, I'll take care of the baby. It'll give, I'll give it everything it wants." It reminded me of when I was a kid and I wanted a dog. It was like that same conversation. Don't worry, I'll walk it every day. It'll be my dog. I'll take care of it. And we all know what happened after that. So it looks like we all know I'm going to be the one that is going to have to take care of that baby.
That's awesome. Yeah, man. So do you still go with the same frequency to like the grief meetup groups? How is that
Oh
experience?
yeah. So the irony is that I started going to that grief group initially so that my parents would shut up about it. They kept telling me, "Oh, they've got a sibling group, you should come. Oh, they've got a sibling group, you should come." I'm like, "Fine, I'm going to come. It's not going to be helpful. We'll never have to talk about this ever again." And now I run it and they don't come. I actually am the co-chapter leader. I've been running the sibling group for over a decade. It's like a cornerstone of my life. I'm a leader there.
That's crazy.
I've been presenting workshops at their national conference for like the last 7 years. I'm a keynote speaker this upcoming March at a regional bereavement conference in Hawaii,
Yeah.
which is the first grief conference that I'm guaranteed to get laid at. So
What's the name of that organization again?
it's called the Compassionate Friends.
And is that it's all types of grief?
No, they deal with it. It's like parents grieving, parents, grandparents, and siblings is who they kind of really focus on.
Gotcha.
And it's it's mostly parents, really. There are some grandparents that come with frequency, but the sibling program is getting larger, but there are not enough sibling groups around the country. It's mostly focused on the parents, as I said. The New York chapter happens to have one of the largest sibling groups in the country, just because it's New York. But
Yeah.
but the Manhattan chapter and the Staten Island chapter, I think, are the two biggest sibling groups in the country.
Yeah. Well, yeah, people, if you need a resource, there's one.
Yeah. And I guess, give it a try, even if you're hesitant, because I guess it really, once you're there, how
I tell you,
quickly
yeah,
do they turn you around?
It's ironic how, like, I always feel like, especially when it's in person, right? We've been doing them on Zoom for the last year and a half. And we had to cancel 2 years worth of our national conferences that were supposed to be in person. Last year was supposed to be in Detroit, and this summer was supposed to be in Atlanta. And they were all on Zoom as well. But going to that national conference, the grief conventions are, it's such a weird, it's such an ironic way to the way that it actually feels versus what you think it's going to be before you go are so diametrically opposed. It's so funny to me. Because, the thing about it is that, like, when you walk into a room and everybody there has lost a sibling, all of the layers of anxiety of which version of myself is going to be accepted are gone. Totally. It's like whatever version I show up as is totally accepted. And it's really like, there's just not a lot of places anywhere where you can feel that, regardless of what you're going through or what you're dealing with. But in particular, as a bereaved sibling, like, sibling loss is, I think, one of the more underrepresented losses. It's not treated as seriously. There's more literature out there on pet loss than there is on sibling loss. And it's more acceptable to talk about pet loss. Like, you could talk about, everybody loses pets, but at the same time, like, it's just, I don't know. I find it's one of those things, that nobody really treats it as a hard thing, a thing that is as hard as it is. I don't think people really understand the difficulty of it. And there's no timeline for it. It doesn't go away. My brother, it's 19 years, still sucks that he's not here. Yeah. It's never going to not suck that he's not here. And I'm never going to not wish he was here. I'm never going to not love him. It's hard to think that some people think that you should be over it or in any kind of span of time.
Yeah.
And I think the hardest thing sometimes is like you hear all that external pressure telling you that you should be over it, quote unquote, in some span of time, that you can believe it for yourself and start to beat yourself up for not being over it or not being certainly, doing as well as you think you should be. But I hate the whole should thing. There is no should. You should be doing better. Says who? I should also be getting blown right now, but that's not happening either.
True. Yeah, man. Yeah, I think people it's really hard to imagine, I think, for most people, unless you've lost a
Yeah.
parent or a son or daughter or sibling.
Well, the sad part is I was telling this to somebody recently, and I've said this in my group a lot, but learning how to deal with grief is similar to learning how to swim.
Mm.
You can't learn it from a book. You got to get in the fucking water.
Right.
And hopefully you don't get pushed into the deep end like I did. But unfortunately, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a little bit more about your podcast before we go. What are some episodes people should check out?
Oh man, I got a lot of great ones. The episode I actually just put out this week is with a woman that wrote a book called It's Your Funeral. And it's all about how to plan the event of a lifetime before it's too late. And it's kind of interesting, even though her book has it sort of tackles it from a sort of a whimsical standpoint, a jokey standpoint, very tongue in cheek. It's an interesting overview of a lot of different funeral services and ways to commemorate yourself. But it's interesting that, we put so much pressure on the people that we leave behind to do all that stuff, not just financially, but people don't even always know what you might have wanted. And like, they're scrambling to do it while they're grieving in their first few days of their own grief process. They have to try to wonder what you might have wanted. So this book is a great opportunity to write some of that stuff down and, think about it ahead of time and think about who might be at your funeral and what you might want out of that. But I've got some great ones. I interviewed George Carlin's daughter, Kelly Carlin. My interview with Lori Kilmartin about her book, Dead People Suck, is really great.
Mm-hmm.
You go through my catalog. I got a lot of good. It's hard to pick one. They're all, they're admittedly kind of heavy, but I find that my goal in a lot of these conversations is to try to have a normal conversation about grief. So there are dick jokes and there's a little bit of, an acknowledgement that there is funny stuff and absurdity to laugh at, especially in retrospect. Sometimes we don't really recognize how funny something might be in the moment because we're crying, but I think it's healthy for me anyway. It's been really impactful to have conversations like that normalize having these talks and recognizing that we all go through this differently. There is no blueprint, and it's okay to do it the way that you do it. Like, that's my number one message, is that it's the hardest part of this is giving ourselves permission, not just to do it the way that we do it, but to have done it the way that we have done it. As long as you're not hurting yourself or anyone around you, you're doing great.
Yeah.
You're still here. You're still breathing. Wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard for us to have that, give ourselves that permission, because we think we should be doing it a certain way, or, society tells us, or I don't know, there's a myriad of reasons why we put roadblocks in our own way sometimes to shame ourselves and to give ourselves a harder time than it needs to be.
Yeah. At my aunt's funeral, someone was giving like a really touching speech about what she meant to her, and someone's Siri went off and it was just like, wow. Everyone cracked up. It was great.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I was just, I don't know if I was talking about this with the woman that wrote the funeral book about a guy in Ireland last year that, as he was being lowered into the ground, had a recording. He had a tape recorder in the casket that started playing a pre-recorded message from him that started like, "Help, I'm in this box." And then went on to, let people know that it was just a joke.
That's so good.
Oh my God. Wow.
Really funny.
That guy had a sick twist of sense of humor.
Yeah.
I dig it.
Yeah. Well, Jordan, these things are usually short. So, this was great. I'm glad you came on, and I hope at least a few people who heard this will, one, realize that they have a resource for grief that's ready and available, and they forget it, they'll know what episode to rewatch. And two, they'll look out for your podcast, Where's the Grief? And I'm sure that'll be a source of comfort for.
Yep. You can find it on iTunes. It's on Stitcher. I'm on Spotify. I'm on all the other ones that pull from those. And I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Where's the Grief. I'm on the Facebook as well. And I will just also recommend that if you are going through a difficult time, if there's a possibility for you to find some peer support in your area, my group, that's kind of their thing is peer support. I find it to be one of the most helpful because there's no professionals there. It's just other people going through the same thing. And you can take their, hear other people's stories as suggestions. It's not really advice, it's just helps you feel heard and understood.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, Jordan, thank you so much for coming on Knowledge
Yeah,
Daddies.
thank you.
Thank you guys. This was fun.
Yeah, definitely. All right,
It's
man.
nice meeting you.
Yeah. Back at you.
All right. I'm going to end the recording.
All right.
Stop it.